going on?
Christy Evans frantically calling Ada police on March 22nd of 2021.
Someone shot my husband. He heard a pool of blood and I heard a loud pop. He's bleeding out his nose and mouth and it's all over the...
Do you see a gun anywhere around him?
No, I don't see anything.
On March 15, 2021, Pastor David Evans of Ada, Oklahoma, sat down to write what looked like the perfect love letter to his wife of 30 years. On Facebook, he called Christy his equal, his partner, the woman he still wanted to pursue like the day they first met. His words painted a picture of devotion, of faith, of marriage at its best. But just 7 days later, that same pastor was dead, shot while sleeping in his own bed. And the person who dialed 911 was the very woman he had just praised to the world. What police uncovered in the days that followed would shatter an entire church community and expose a marriage full of secrets, abuse, and betrayal. To the people of Ada, Oklahoma, David Evans was more than just a man. He was a leader, a guide, and for many, a spiritual anchor. At 50 years old, he had built a reputation as the charismatic pastor of Harmony Free Will Baptist Church. His sermons carried energy, his smile filled the room, and his congregation looked to him for hope and direction. At his side, almost always, was his wife of 3 decades, Christy. Together, they seemed like the embodiment of small-town faith and family values. They raised 3 children, they hosted gatherings, they lived in the parsonage provided by the church. From the pews, their life appeared steady and enviable. David himself often reminded the world of how much he adored his wife. On social media, his words painted the picture of a man still deeply in love. That March 15 Facebook post wasn't an exception, it was a continuation of years of public declarations. He told the world how Christy wasn't his possession but his partner, how she amazed him, how he wanted to keep pursuing her like when they first met. To outsiders, this was the dream marriage. A pastor who practiced what he preached. A wife who supported him faithfully. A couple who had weathered decades together and still looked in love. But perfection can be a mask. And the closer you got to David and Christy's marriage, the more that mask began to slip. What the church saw from the pews was one story. What Christy's family saw behind closed doors was something far darker. While David's Facebook posts painted Christy as cherished and adored, her reality was far different. Behind the parsonage doors, relatives say Christy lived in what they called a silent prison. She appeared calm in public, dutiful in her role as pastor's wife, but inside, she was worn down by years of control. Christy would later tell investigators that David was controlling and verbally abusive. Experts who studied her case described it as a textbook example of coercive control, a form of abuse that isn't always visible. It doesn't always leave bruises, but it strips away freedom in ways that are just as damaging. Coercive control can mean isolation from friends and family. It can mean constant belittling, financial domination, or sexual coercion. Over time, it makes the victim feel trapped, as if escape is impossible. One expert even compared it to living in a hostage situation, not because of visible chains, but because the person's entire life is controlled. Christy's father, Ed Armour, later said his daughter lived in a personal hell. She smiled in church pews, she nodded at her husband's sermons, but at home, she was shrinking. Her world revolved around keeping peace, avoiding criticism, and bending to David's demands. Still, Christy didn't leave. She had built her entire adult life around this marriage. She was a pastor's wife in a small Oklahoma town, a place where walking away could mean not only losing her family, but losing her community. In her mind, there was no safe exit. But everything began to shift when David opened the marriage door to something Christy never expected, something that would eventually change everything. Behind the polished sermons and glowing Facebook posts, David Evans carried a secret that his congregation never saw. Away from the pulpit, he invited outsiders into his marriage, a world far removed from the image of a devout pastor and husband. David began arranging threesomes. He introduced Christy to strangers, pushing the boundaries of their marriage in ways that blurred lines between intimacy and control. One of those strangers was a 26-year-old man named Khalil Square. What started as a hidden indulgence soon became something far more dangerous. For David, these encounters were an extension of his appetite, a secret thrill he could manage. But for Christy, Square represented something different. He wasn't just another participant. He was someone who listened. Someone outside her world of church walls and control. Slowly, she began to see him as more than an escape from routine. She began to see him as a way out. The connection between Christy and Square grew. While David treated their encounters as something he controlled, Christy began forming a bond that David didn't own. And in that bond, a desperate idea began to take shape. It wasn't the thought of leaving. Christy believed she couldn't safely walk away. Instead, the thought that settled in her mind was darker. If her husband was gone, the prison she lived in would finally open. And with Square, she believed she had found someone willing to help her make that happen. In the early morning hours of March 22, 2021, Ada police dispatchers
Christy
received
Evans
a
now
panic
facing
call.
charges after authorities say she confessed to planning her husband, David Evans's murder. That confession coming after she made this 911 call claiming an unknown intruder killed her husband.
Someone shot my husband. He heard a pool of blood and I heard a loud pop. He's bleeding out his nose and mouth and it's all over the bed.
Claiming she
On the line was Christy Evans. Her voice shook as she reported that an intruder had broken into the home and shot her husband while he slept. When officers rushed to the parsonage, they found Pastor David Evans lying in bed, a gunshot wound to the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The home was strangely undisturbed. Nothing was taken, and there were no signs of forced entry. Christy told officers she had woken to the sound of the gunshot. She said she hadn't seen the shooter, that everything happened so fast, she could only assume it was a break-in. To the untrained ear, she sounded like a grieving widow. But detectives noticed inconsistencies right away. Why would a burglar slip into a pastor's home, fire one shot, and leave without stealing a thing? Why was there no broken lock, no shattered glass, no evidence of an intruder at all? For 3 days, Christy played her part. She attended to her family, accepted condolences, and clung to the story of a faceless gunman. But behind closed doors, investigators were pressing harder. They had a feeling the truth wasn't outside the Evans home, it was inside. And on March 25, just 3 days after David's murder, Christy Evans finally broke. On March 25, 2021, Christy Evans walked into the Ada Police Department and surrendered. For 3 days she had carried the secret, but now, she told investigators everything. In her statement, she admitted she had begged 26-year-old Khalil Square to kill her husband. She confessed she encouraged him, gave him access to the house, and waited as David lay asleep in bed. This wasn't the work of a masked intruder. It was the result of a plan she had set in motion. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed about a love triangle gone deadly. Reporters latched onto the shocking mix of religion, sex, and betrayal. A pastor's wife, her younger lover, and a murder that tore apart a congregation. Still, to prosecutors, it was murder. Cold, deliberate, and calculated. And now, the courts would have to decide, was Christy Evans a manipulator who engineered her husband's death? Or a battered wife who believed her only way out was to end his life? In the weeks that followed, Christy Evans was charged with first-degree murder. Her defense prepared to argue that she wasn't a mastermind at all, but a battered woman, someone trapped for decades in a cycle of coercive control who saw no safe way out. They planned to use the concept of battered woman syndrome in court, painting her actions not as cold-blooded, but as desperate. David's family, meanwhile, grieved a man they loved and respected. His mother admitted she never saw the abuse others described, and she refused to believe her son was the controlling figure Christy's family portrayed. For her, no matter what struggles existed in the marriage, death should never have been the answer. The Harmony Free Will Baptist Church faced a different kind of devastation. Their pastor, the man they had trusted to lead them spiritually, was gone, and his private life had been exposed in ways that stunned the community. The church released a statement reminding everyone that even pastors are human, vulnerable to failure and weakness. Still, they urged their congregation to cling to their faith through the scandal and grief. For the rest of the world, the story of David and Christy Evans became more than just another headline. It raised difficult questions. How much do we ever really know about the people who lead our communities? How many marriages hide private pain behind public perfection? And when love turns into control, what is the cost of staying silent? In the end, one man was dead. One woman was behind bars. And a church family was left broken. The final question remains, was this a story of betrayal and manipulation, or the desperate act of a woman who believed murder was her only escape?